by the response of the philanthropic sector. That frankly, may just be my specific clients and the institutional funders and families that I'm working with. But to be honest, over the past couple of weeks, it's been I'm not even like, I don't have my contacts in, I don't have my hair's not done. I mean, it's kind of just been crazy. But anyway, just to kind of let you know, that at least for me feels like a real ray of hope in this time, is that the philanthropic funders, at least all the 100% of the philanthropic funders that I work with, and that's about 8 or 9 right now currently, they're all just doing what everything that they can. Some of them are even looking at spend down scenarios to just enable their community to get through this. So anyway, we'll get into some of these details, and I look forward to your questions. One caveat before we do move forward. When I'm talking, like, philanthropy is pretty broad, but I'm coming from a very specific experience of primarily small, private, institutional foundations, but some families, some individuals that are grant making in the range of $5,000 to $500,000 ticket sizes, and their grant making annually is typically $300,000 to maybe $15 million at the largest, and that I'd say that 15 million is an exception. That's one client. So that's not, we're not talking about, I'm not talking about the USAIDs of the world. I'm not talking about multi-million dollar grants. Okay. With that caveat, let's jump in. So the specific responses that I've seen just over the past, I'd say over the past couple of weeks, so the past 2 weeks is really where I've seen most of this movement, has been in two forms: in a financial response and in a non-financial response. So starting with those financial responses, the top part of the slide there, they've been mostly and primarily with existing grants. So just caveat, keeping that in mind, existing grantees with the community that already exists within their grantee portfolios. So just keep that in mind. So within existing grants, I'm seeing a lot of all the funders releasing grant restrictions, allowing conversion of grants. One funder is converting up to 3 months of restricted to unrestricted within their grants. I'm seeing within pipeline grants. So a lot of my work has actually over the past this past week been reaching out to all of the grants and grantees, potential grantees that have grants in pipeline, and allowing them to convert those from project to unrestricted grants. So those kinds of things, being much, much more flexible. And on the on those pipeline grants, I'm also seeing an operational response in terms of, in able to make that conversion. They're really only requesting a paragraph. So they want a paragraph, just let us know, and it's automatically happening. And then in terms of new grants, again, I'm recommending focusing on existing funders because funders see you all as their community and they want to see you thrive and get through this. So the specific kinds of grants that I'm seeing are obviously COVID-19 specific, moving you to to be able to telework efficiently and effectively, training in that, et cetera, as well as just complete unrestricted grants. I'm seeing some automatic donations, just donations going out to all their grantees, even if they're unsolicited. And then I've seen, and this is very rare, but I have seen a couple of micro grant funds created, emergency funds related to COVID, that are going out to their grantee communities, grant communities. So, one step past maybe the intermediary or the grantee organization. But those are rare. And then in terms of the non-financial response, again, operational flexibility, and the things that I would keep in mind and even ask of your grantors are extensions for reports, no cost extensions for grants. So that just is extending the timeline of your grants. Cost extensions, which maybe you guys maybe haven't heard as much about, but use them now, ask about them now, which is about not only extending the life of the term of the grant, but also adding additional funding to that grant. So that can happen, but it just may be a bit more operationally challenging, but it's happening. And then reducing your grant scope. So just cutting out that event and being okay with it, and that's all right. Other non-financial responses, making funders are finding and offering virtual training and webinars. For example, I'll send around another when I've got time to put it in the chat. There are some great online financial planning webinars that I've seen to just help you think this through, right? And then virtual convening, right? Getting grantees together to just compare notes, frankly vent, right? A real safe space, in order to learn from peers. And I haven't seen this happen quite yet. Well, I guess we're seeing it now, right? But learning from funders, right? Also just hearing from funders and being able to create that safe space to just like ask questions and figure out how we all get through this. Next slide, Alex. Okay, so some tips for grant fundraising in the world that we are in now. Again, focus on your existing funders, donors, and supporters. I know, you might think, oh, this is an opportunity to kind of talk with other funders. That could be true. I'm not saying it's not, but most of the, at least the funders I'm working with are not in a space to be looking at new organizations doing new things, unless they're one-off. And so maybe that's the other nuance is, if you're getting grants from other folks, absolutely keep, using those as future leads, but know that this is crisis funding right now. And that funding may not grow over time. It may just, again, be crisis funding. Secondly, I really, really encourage everyone I'm sure is kind of just feeling freaked out. My husband is a CEO of a nonprofit organization, and he was arguing with me every single when I was putting this together. He was arguing with me about a lot of these things, but I'm seeing a lot of grantees just kind of coming to me and freaking out. And yes, you want to communicate urgency, but you do not want to communicate freak out, right? So develop your survival financial scenarios. What are your scenarios? Scenario 3 month. If you're stuck at home 3 months and COVID is probably the reality, right? But then your scenario B, 6 months. Then your scenario, we're stuck at home for a year, right? Like, what are your scenarios? Along with each of those scenarios, 3, 6, 12, or 6, 12, 18, or whatever it is, how are you reducing costs across there? And how are you increasing revenues, or at least salvaging what revenue you can, right? So reducing cost, just a little hint that I'm hearing, reducing hours may be better than reducing salaries. Just kind of, people were thinking about straight cap of 75%. Everyone takes a salary cut. It's across the board. That's pretty demoralizing. Reducing hours instead, that maybe is just a little bit more palatable in terms of, getting those costs down, but just, oh, you know what, you've got, you're at 70% time. You've got 30% more time to just sit and meditate, right? So increase again, just a couple of, and I'll give an example of these kinds of things later. Along with those survival scenarios, what do you need from staff, your board, your clients, and your funders, right? If your clients do this in that scenario, what do you need from your funders? And then use those scenarios to be very specific about where and how your funders can bridge you, right? So there was something that had been highlighted on the earlier slide, was that I'm seeing mostly micro grants. Okay, so I'm seeing mostly 1,000 to maximum 5,000, maybe with existing grantees, kind of $20,000 grants. And those are like those automatic things that are just like, yes, help. These tips that I'm providing are actually for plans that will help bridge you a year, possibly 2 years. These are bigger grants. These are not automatic micro grants. These are things where you really want to have a good plan and justification for where this funding is going, because at least for the relatively small funders in philanthropy that I'm looking at, they don't have a lot of money, right? So they're going to kind of need the case. And if this means survival for you, then make the case. An example, and then I'll be done and can move on. So an example is a grantee I was working with. It's actually a grantee in the US, and they came freak out mode and was like, okay, let's sit down. If this lasts 3 months, a lot of their funding, a third of their funding, which is about $100,000. So it's a small organization, and those are the folks that are freaking out. If this lasts for 3 months, they do not do the primary income generating activity of field trips. They do field trips, and that's about $100,000 over the summer. They're having to cut those. So that means then in their scenario for 3 months, they're down $100,000. How are they reducing costs? By redeploying some of their staff, reducing some of their staff's hours, and also at least salvaging some revenue from those field trips. So they actually are able to do some of those field trip activities virtually, right? So they're salvaging some of that income. So they're getting to, $25,000 out of that $100,000. So what they really need from their funders is several things. They need in that 3-month scenario, they need to fill operations for about 3 months while they innovate and adapt and connect with clients to understand what they want in an online experience. They want some technical assistance for creating that online experience. So that bridges them over that time. And not only that, they're actually innovating on their field trips. And that can actually potentially increase their impact over time, because in addition to the in-person field trips, once we get them to the other side, now they'll also have this virtual offering, a more affordable experience, which will be more inclusive for them. So again, that is another tip. Consider innovations that you've always wanted to pilot. Maybe going virtual, that I've talked about, obviously people will need to do. But to do that well and to make money on it, it's going to take some time, right? So making that case of this is an innovation, not only that you're doing because of the COVID crisis, but that you thought about doing in any case, because it could increase your impact over time. That's a great ask, because it's not just emergency, help me. It's, moving you to a place of increased impact, no matter whether COVID's here or not. Oh, I forgot this slide. Sorry, Alex. Oh no, you reformatted. Okay, it's better formatting. Tell me to move on if I'm taking up too much time. Okay. Just, and I'm sure this will be available. These are some ideas, right? A lot of the ideas that I'm seeing, covering your immediate costs to work effectively virtually. Again, things you've wanted to pilot that make sense now and can actually increase your impact over time. Capacity building of your in-house staff. They can't do their existing projects because it's services delivery going out, but they can build their capacity to be even more effective after this. Unrestricted to cover your financial gaps, again, based on those really strong financial scenarios that you talked about. And then, I cannot stress this enough. Funders know other funders. And they know other funders well. And so ask them about other resources that they know about and can introduce you to. Leverage your funders much. People don't ask me, and it's really strange. You should ask them. And then finally, when you've gotten across to the other side and you've had a vacation and you've been able to just chill and not be in this kind of space, think about the big 3 things financially that this showed were the weaknesses and gaps in your organization, and prep for COVID-20, right? Because this is a practice in resilience. It may not be COVID next time, but it'll be something else, right? So, man, 6-month reserve. I know it's crazy to think of now, but this is your financial health. This is the resilience of you, your team, and your organization. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you, Abbie. A few great questions came in. I'm going to hold those until the end, just so we have a chance for all the panelists to talk. So I want to move on to Ted Levinson to talk a little bit about debt funders and their response here and tips for engaging that community. So Ted, go ahead.
Thanks, Alex. Hello, everyone. I run Beneficial Returns. We make equipment loans of $50,000 to $500,000 to social enterprises addressing poverty in Latin America and Southeast Asia. 4 of our borrowers are alumni of the Miller Center. I see a few familiar names in the participant list. Our borrowers pay about 8% on average to borrow money from us. the capital that we lend, we borrow from family foundations and donor-advised funds and faith-based organizations. All of our borrowers pay us on a monthly basis, and we pay our investors principal and interest on a semi-annual basis, and our investors earn a 2% return. We borrow money from our investors for 7 years, and we make loans that range between 2 years and 7 years. And we report quarterly to our investors on our performance. So I wanted to share a little bit about how we're responding to the virus. The first thing that we did nearly 2 weeks ago is we offered a 3-month payment holiday to all of our borrowers. So they get to skip their monthly payments for the next 3 months, and then we're extending all their loans by an additional 3 months. So the good Lord willing, we'll collect all the money that we were intending to collect. It will just take 3 months longer for us to do that. And we hope that this extra, this payment holiday will let the social enterprises hopefully stabilize and certainly put the money that they would have paid us to more immediate urgent needs. We're also pausing all of the loans that we currently have in underwriting until we can get a better grasp around the scope of the virus. So we are not, we're not stopping our lending program, but we are slowing down as we try to understand what the risks are for our borrowers. On the other hand, we're definitely funding loans that have already been approved, and we expect to fund 2 loans in the next 10 days or so. And then we have enhanced contact with our borrowers. We're figuring out how we can be helpful. I think something that's important for you to remember is that your lenders are your partners. You know, the moment that we make a loan, we become financially invested in your survival and in your success. And when it comes to negotiating with your lender, it doesn't have to be confrontational. Alex, the next slide, or maybe 2. There you go. All right. Many of you may be freaking out. Abbie spoke about this, asking how will you repay your loans? Listen very carefully to me. Do not freak out. That's my job, okay? Think about it. Think about it. Would you rather be the guy who got the loan and now you're trying to figure out how to pay the money back? Or would you rather be the guy who made the loan who isn't sure that he's going to get paid back? Okay, you guys, I'm giving away some lender secrets here, okay? But you guys have way more power than you might think at the moment, okay? Because you got the money, okay? So worry about the people you serve, worry about the people you employ, but the landlord, the lender, the phone company, not so much, okay? Don't worry about those guys so much. Next slide. Okay, there are 3, first of all, what's the chance that I could find a picture of money with a sloth on it? The slowest animal in the world, okay? This is from Costa Rica. God bless the internet. Okay, there are 3 types of people in the world. My favorite are the punctual people. They tell you they'll be somewhere and they show up there on time, okay? Next are the people who are running late, but they have the decency, they have the courtesy, they have the foresight to know that they're going to be late, and they let you know well in advance. Okay, this is the guy who calls you at 9:10 and says he's going to be late for the 10 o'clock meeting. Okay, last are the people I despise. You can probably figure out who these people are. They're running late, and either they're unaware that they are late, or they don't have the courtesy to let you know that you're late. And these are the jerks that text you at 9:58 for your 10 a.m. appointment, and they say that they're going to be like 50 minutes late, okay? Do not be that guy, okay? A lot of you are going to be running late. Don't be that last guy. As lenders, we hate hearing that somebody will be late, but we would much rather get lots of notice and an excuse than to hear it at the last minute, or even worse, to have to chase you down to find out where your payment is or why it's not coming. When you take the initiative to reach out to your lender, there are a few things that it conveys. Okay, first and foremost, it tells me you understand your business It tells me you understand their cash flows, right? It also tells me you're aware of your obligations and you take them seriously and you respect our relationship. And it tells me that you're honest, okay? I've had a borrower who gave me nearly a 2-month warning that they thought that they were going to miss a payment. So that's like calling today and saying, I'm good for May 1, but I think I may be late for June 1, and this is why. And then remarkably, they weren't late. But my opinion of that borrower went through the roof because they had the foresight to see that they anticipated a cash flow problem, and they had the courtesy to reach out to me. And that just put them in an entirely different league. And I encourage you to do this, the same thing. Now, I can tell you which day of the month each one of my borrowers owes us money, because that's the lifeblood of our organization, are these monthly payments that we're expecting. So tell me if you're experiencing tough times, and tell me soon. Of course, when you make that call, I'd also like to know why you can't pay me on time and when you are gonna start paying me. Next slide. So I wanna talk a little bit about lender economics. Earlier, when I introduced beneficial returns, I intentionally summarized a lot of our structure and our economics. And I think it's wise that you're familiar with these same things for your own lenders. It's good to know how they operate so you can understand what their constraints are and what their obligations are when you call them up with plenty of warning to let them know that you're going to need some accommodations on their part. And you should go through a similar analysis for your landlord and your suppliers, and maybe each individual employee of yours, just to understand what their constraints are and what their needs are and what their obligations are. Listen, if you have a loan from the Dubai Sovereign Wealth Fund, don't sweat it because they're not sweating it, okay? On the other hand, if you have a loan from me, you better take it seriously. Try to think through what the implications are for your lender if you don't pay them on time, or if you extend the loan, or if you default entirely. You can ask some of these questions directly to the lender. Do they report annually? And as long as you get caught up by December 31, maybe they're cool with it. These are the types of questions that, are they paid on a performance basis, or are they paid a flat management fee? Sometimes the best way to figure out how much leeway you have with your lender is to figure out how much leeway they have with theirs. Next slide. Okay, I'm not proud of this, but lending is a business where you make money really, really slowly and where you lose it really quickly. And a late borrower just means that you make it even more slowly, okay? Here I've compared on the left the financial impact to a fund like beneficial returns of a portfolio that performs, and on the right, one that has a single default that comprises 10% of the portfolio, okay? And you'll notice 10% of the portfolio defaulted. They defaulted on day one in this example, and income went down by 84%. So let's think about that, right? 10% of the portfolio defaulted, total income went down by, revenue went down by 84%. Obviously, if two borrowers defaulted, the revenue would be, the income would be negative, right? So that's a pretty ugly, or nearly negative, pretty ugly situation that we're in. Loan forgiveness is nearly impossible for lenders to offer. We just can't afford it. At Beneficial Returns, we need about 15 borrowers to all pay us back perfectly to make up for one who doesn't pay us. And as lenders, our biggest fear is that you won't be able to repay the principal that you owe us. But asking for more time to make payments, particularly in this environment, is perfectly reasonable. Walk in with a plan that shows how the lenders ultimately get repaid if they're patient and they're flexible. And then show them politely how they're going to lose principal if they don't agree to the plan. I think it's always best to offer to pay something. If you have quarterly payments of $10,000, offer to make quarterly payments of $500 for the next few months. I think as a lender, I like knowing that my borrower remembers that they owe us money, and even a small check every month conveys that to me. That you may also offer to provide reporting at that time, updates with every payment that you make. I'm seeing some folks that are adding us to their investor or board emails that are going out, which I respect a lot. Any form of communication that we get is always helpful to us. Next slide, please. Okay, if you have a US entity, for-profit or nonprofit, and you don't take advantage of the free money on offer from the US government, I think you are absolutely crazy. It takes 4 minutes to apply, and you can do it entirely online, and you will get a $10,000 grant into your checking account next week if you apply today. 10,000 bucks. There's a second program available called the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, that is a slightly more complicated, not much more, and has the potential for a larger amount of money. But soon I'm going to share with you my email address. If you send me an email, I will send you instructions on how to apply. I have done it myself for my own business. It literally takes 4 minutes to apply. They ask for your routing and bank account number, and I have not seen the money hit my account yet, but I have every reason to think that'll be there, in my case, by Monday or Tuesday. So there are programs out there, and I'm happy to share them with you for US tax-paying companies and US nonprofits. All right, you guys know the 80-20 rule, right? Normally, churches add seating when 80% of the seats are filled. That tells them that they need to go and add more seating. 80% of car accidents are caused by 20% of drivers. 80% of murder victims know the perpetrator. What's my point? It's the same point Abbie was making. There's a very strong likelihood that if you're looking for a bridge loan, it's going to come from an existing investor or certainly an existing supporter. So resist the urge, other than in a few specific cases and places, resist the urge to be trying to cultivate a new relationship. This is not the time to do this. It's the time to double down to the people that already know your organization and have already supported your social enterprise in the past. So next slide. All right, there you go. You've got my contact information there. We've got a photo from a GSBI grad, Sistema Bio, on there. I would be, feel free to reach out to me if I can provide this information about the 2 government programs that are out there in the US, but also if you have any further questions for me, happy to speak with you by phone or by email. Thanks.
Thank you, Ted. And can you just, for the participants, repeat the names of those 2 US programs?
So one of them is called the Paycheck Protection Program. And so let me back up. Both of these programs are called loan programs. And so, however, due to loan forgiveness, both programs have components that will wind up being outright grants. So one is called a loan advance. That's the $10,000 program. And I believe it's part of EIDL, the emergency, I don't know what I stands for, or D, L is loan. I'll share that with you guys in a moment. And the other one is the Paycheck Protection Program, which will give you up to 2.5 months of your past payroll as a loan, which will then be forgiven provided that you keep those employees on payroll for the next 8 weeks. The bottom line is, although these programs both take the form of loans coming from the Small Business Administration, the expectation is that a large amount, and quite possibly all of that loan that you take, will be forgiven in short order.
Great, thank you, Ted.
Email me, I'll send you links. I'll do, and instructions on what information you're going to need to apply.
Great, appreciate that. So moving on to Bob, who's going to be talking a little bit about the equity space. So Bob, go ahead and take it away.
Hey, thanks a lot, and it's great to see everybody, old friends on the attendee list. So great to be here. And before I forget it, just picking up on Ted's good comments about what the U.S. government is doing, is that there are in our respective countries where we operate, like in Bangladesh, there are similar programs being set up. So if you're not a U.S.-based organization, check what's happening in your locale. Okay, next slide.
Sorry, Bob, before I let you go any further, I see a lot of questions coming into the chat. If you could all put those questions into the Q&A function instead, it'll be easier for us to get to them later. So thank you. Go ahead, Bob, sorry.
Yeah, okay, great. So just quickly, many of you know SEAF, many of you don't. We are a US-based firm. We've been around for 30 years. Basically, most of our funds, of which we've had 40, in over 30 different countries, have been making equity investments as opposed to loans. And we've been focused just on emerging and frontier markets. In our particular impact investing approach, as many of you know, we look for commercial returns or market returns in our investments, but at the same time, impact is very important to us, and we look to triple impact with every deal that we do. Just as a little bit of background. Okay, Alex, next slide. So, you know, this is titled, What Are Impact Investors Doing? And this is obviously from the lens of what SEAF is doing. Again, most of our funds are country specific, so we don't have a global fund from which we invest, but they're country specific with different investors in each fund. And right now, I would say we probably have about 45 portfolio companies across our platform at the moment. And I think if you think about what we're focusing on, primarily we're focusing on our current portfolio. And I think this is kind of echoing what my colleague already said, rather on developing new pipeline. And I think probably the reason is pretty obvious, is that's where our risk is. And also you can look at that, that's where our opportunity is. So primarily we'd be focusing on our portfolio. And in a select basis, we would be providing emergency cash to some of those companies. In some of our funds, actually out of what we call the investment period. So we actually don't even have any cash to offer. And for those of you who might not know the business, most impact funds or funds are 10 years in length. We have a 5-year investment period. Once that period's over with, then there's no investments to be made. We're in sort of the running out the portfolio. But as you might imagine, where we're heavily involved with our portfolio companies is on cash flow management. And because in the short term, and Abbie was quite right about thinking about 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months in scenario planning. But of course, we're right now in the here and there. And so what we're talking about, what's happening over the next 3 months, and making sure that you have up-to-date cash flow projections. Well, we'll get to this in the next slide, but also what we're looking at is our accounts receivable and accounts payable strategies. As you might imagine, you're trying to accelerate receivables and delay payables. It's not rocket science there. And in some cases, we're actually advising companies to try to get advance payment, on sales, but you can imagine that would be tough. So where we're primarily working with our companies is on scenario planning and then cash flow projections from that to manage what needs to be done to get through this tough period. We do a lot of work anyway, but particularly now with helping companies, our portfolio companies, negotiate with banks. I'm going to talk about that more in the next bank loans in our portfolio companies, but also helping companies get additional funding somewhere else. And because we are equity investors, always thinking about, at the end of the day, how can the value of the company increase over time? I mean, that's our business model. That's how we make money. So thinking about post-COVID-19, what does that look like, and what opportunities are presenting itself to the company that we can work together to exploit, assuming we get, of course, through the rough period. And I think what can't be overstated here is, as we think about ourselves being a partner with our portfolio companies, is simply a morale booster. So my colleagues on this call have been looking at this kind of in different perspectives, but I think the attitude is, hey, we can do this. We can do it together. Let's not panic. Let's stay calm. Let's take it step by step about what we have to do as soon as possible to get through this. We'll get through it together. And I think that cannot be overstated in what we're trying to do. Now, what I would also say from C's point of view, I don't have a slide on this, but what we're trying to do is put together in collaboration with the new USDFI an emergency working capital facility to support our portfolio companies around the globe. And this would be admittedly focused on our own portfolio, but we active negotiations. I hope we can have it in place within 3 weeks. It's just something that we're trying to do for our portfolio. Not easy to do. What I would say is, as far as investors in dealing, if you have an equity investor in your company, it's hard to generalize exactly what they might be dealing with, because how they're going to deal with you can relate to what they might be dealing with themselves, as Ted has already alluded to. Okay, next slide, Alex. Okay, and again, some of this, with apologies, is sort of repeating what's already been said, but be proactive with a bias for action. Yes, it's a stressful period. It's easy to get in panic mode, but I think it's the time for action. So part of that action is being transparent with your staff, your funders, and your suppliers. If we think about your banks, for example, be very proactive with your bank. Don't wait for the bank to call you. But when you go to the bank with a plan. So basically, you go to the bank and you say, hey, listen, like a lot of other people, we have a problem, but we have a plan and we need your partnership in realizing the plan. And if we work together on realizing this plan, as Ted mentioned, hopefully you can say, we can help preserve your principal. But I think the main thing is to be proactive, whether it's with your bank, whether it's with your suppliers, and I would say even with your staff. So, what I would say from C's point of view, because, I think as Ted has already alluded to, is our portfolio companies are having challenges. Well, we're having challenges, right? And part of what we've tried to do is to be transparent with our staff about what we're dealing with, what those challenges are, what are the key milestones, and what is our plan to deal with it. But again, be razor focused on cash. If you have to, you got to make those hard decisions. Reduce costs as much as possible. And sometimes that relates to payroll. And every jurisdiction is a little bit different about how you can reduce payroll. You might have a certain notice period, which doesn't help you. If you got, I don't know, by law or by contract, your employee contracts, if you have a 3-month notice period, well, that doesn't really help you, right, in the next 3 months. Maybe it's possible to actually reduce pay. Again, every environment can be a little bit different. Let's see. One of the things that we've been working with portfolio companies is to have, and Abbie's already alluded to this, shovel-ready projects for donors ready to go. So, for example, I've got a package for $100,000 or for $250,000 or $500,000, and this is what I can do with it, and this can help my business survive and later prosper. So have those shovel-ready projects ready. What we have seen in our marketplace is competitors actually working together. Now, the nature of our business is not the same probably with many of the entrepreneurs on this call. Probably we're dealing with larger companies, but we have seen examples where companies that otherwise have been really sharks for market share and real competitors for market share have actually ended up working together. So, for example, in Kosovo, one of our portfolio companies is a cable company. So the cable industry got together specifically around this to lobby the government for certain relief for the cable sector. We had in Georgia, we have a supermarket company that worked with its arch rival for market share on collaboratively working on community transportation for their employees, right? Which all relates to some of the COVID-19 risks. And of course, last but not least, being the equity investor, you're always things are always half full. So how can you make lemonade out of lemons? How can you make lemonade out of lemons? And this is both in the near term and it's looking a little bit longer term. It's a big problem. It's a big hairy ass problem that we're dealing with right now. But when you get to those types of situations and crises, there can also be opportunity. So for example, we have an education company in Bangladesh as an investee or portfolio company. Now, their services, their classes, their education has all been in brick and mortar stuff. So guess what they're doing? Of course, they're moving to online and looking at this as an opportunity for them, and we're helping them get through that. So some of the other things we're doing is we're having, I think I mentioned we have, most of our funds are geographically based. So our portfolio is geographically based. So what we've been trying to do is facilitate calls with our portfolio companies so they can talk to each other, so they can learn from each other and they can support each other. And the other thing that we've been doing internally, again, because we have different funds in different countries, is having our own people. So our investment staff in Bangladesh, sharing information with our investment staff of Vietnam, with our investment staff in Morocco, and et cetera, because there are lessons to learn in techniques to employ. So, it's very much at a high level. Some of this is repeating what my colleagues have already said, and I'd love to hear some great questions from the attendees. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Bob. So yeah, if anyone has questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you so you can talk. I'm going to go ahead and summarize kind of a few questions that I've seen come in, mostly for Abbie, but I think anyone can take a shot at this. There's been a few people who I've spoken to and in the chat here that are in fairly late stage conversations with potential funders. They've been in the diligence process or the pipeline for a number of months now, working towards getting kind of a concrete proposal approved. And now that this COVID crisis has hit, they're in limbo. And so what tips would you all have for someone in a scenario like that, whether it's a grantee or a potential borrower? I think the advice here has been, focus on your existing funders, but what if someone is almost an existing funder? How can you get them off that? Or should you, is the ship sunk and should you move on to other avenues? So Abbie, if you want to take a shot at that first, but then we can go to whoever else.
Yeah, no, I hope that my comments didn't stop anyone from going after opportunities that they see. And in particular, the folks who are early stage in their fundraising and have no existing funders, absolutely, go for them. Again, it's all about relationship building, right? So just relationships that are strong through, now that you can create and forged in the crucible, that will last you through COVID-20, right? So absolutely, go for them. Tips and tricks, let's see, for that scenario. Then actually it's so, I talked yesterday with a family that is actually more looking at the news and for example, they've never funded in Detroit or they've never funded in New Orleans, but they're seeing those areas as COVID-19 hotspots. So they are just beginning to open up grant making there without any links there. They just see they want to help, right? So of course there are those types of opportunities and jump on them if you see them. I would, in that scenario then, before pre-COVID-19, I'm sure that you had a list of potentials. Keep it that, right? Ideally, if they're potentials lists, the background, the people, you can hunt them down on LinkedIn. You can, again, anything you can do to kind of, create that relationship. In those kinds of situations, the same kinds of best practices, good practices for looking for funders and investors apply. just even more so because they're cold leads, right? They're not people you know already, but go for them. Don't let my comment stop you guys. I also wanted to just mention, I forgot to mention this earlier. There is one consolidated list of both grant and impact investing COVID funding that I've seen, and this is being compiled by Kathy Clark at the case at Duke. I'll send that in the chat in terms of, and it's actually a live list too. So if, in particular, any of the funders or any of the folks on this call see other resources that are not on that list, add them on. It's an open list and it's growing every day. So I'll put that in the chat.
Great, thank you, Abbie. We had a question come in. Likely, Bob, you might be best to take a shot at this one. What about revenue-based financing and VPOs and things like that? Are those suitable for entrepreneurs during this crisis? And is anyone doing those types of deals for entrepreneurs right now?
Well, I think the honest short answer is I don't know. I would imagine if they've already been doing it, then probably the basic principle or assumption would be they're probably focusing on their current portfolio rather than new pipeline. But that's sort of instinct, right? If they have a portfolio, that's where they're going to be spending their energy, because they're going to be working almost 24/7 to try to help their current portfolio. But that's not very helpful, but that's an honest answer.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Bob. If anyone has a question that they would like to ask live, feel free to raise your hand and we can, I just saw one come in. There we go. I'm gonna let Gita speak. All right, go ahead. I think you have to unmute yourself, but then you should be able to ask your question.
Thank you. You hear me now?
Yes.
Well, my question is for three presenters, for Abbie, Ted, and Bob. We were not in the US. I currently based in Africa, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I think the corona threat is everywhere and every business is affected. Won't be able to travel region to region to deliver product and goods. And business is totally affected. I wonder, what kind of support and assistance we could get for those who are not based in the US, especially for Africa, and what kind of link you guys are sharing in terms of grant, the financing or donation or co-financing. That's what I really want to ask. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Which of the panelists want to take a shot at that first?
I think I'll respond to that, but with a general comment that it never so the people and the institutions that have supported your work and your geography in the past are the ones that are more likely to support your work and your geography today. Notwithstanding what Abbie said, which sounds crazy and amazing and rare of someone moving into a geography that they've never been in before, I think it's a fool's errand if you're going to approach someone that has never made a grant or an investment in Ethiopia or wherever you're based, and to think that they will do that now. So because of the global nature of the virus, it is affecting everyone everywhere. So if you only give money in San Francisco, COVID's affecting San Francisco, you'll probably give your money there. If you're only investing money in the UK, COVID's affecting the UK, you'll probably invest your money there. So my advice is to resist the urge to look beyond the obvious places that would have supported you last December. So the list that Abbie referenced is a great one. from Duke University. GSBI also has a great list that they're developing. Kathy's list can be sorted by country. So you can type in Ethiopia. If you're in coffee, you can type in coffee. If you're serving women, you can type in women and see what pops up there. But do not, don't go down the garden path of thinking that you're going to persuade someone who's never put money in your country or in your industry to start doing it now. All of us are, if anything, most investors, most lenders, most donors are doubling down on what they already know. I will throw out one possibility though. I think that a lot of social enterprises are sitting on inventory that they can't move because of the situation that we're in. And those assets, if you recall what Bob's presentation, he talked about considering selling assets. Well, one thing that you may do is consider selling inventory at a deep discount, consider borrowing against your inventory, consider going to one of your investors or lenders and seeing if they will buy your inventory or lend against your inventory now to get you over this period of time. But generally speaking, you got to go to the usual suspects.
Great, thank you, Ted. I think we have time for maybe one more question if someone else wants to. Oh, sorry, Bob, you have a response to that?
Yeah, well, first of all, absolutely, Ted was spot on. I don't need to say anything more about that. I did want to go back to the revenue-based financing. So, I mean, the answer in the investment world is always, well, it depends, right? So it depends on the circumstances. I would say this, that if you think about a revenue-based financing model, my experience with that, and I've actually, worked for a fund who did this primarily, is you're talking about an investment vehicle of 3 to 7, 8 years in length. So what we're dealing with right now seems to be a very short-term crisis in terms of working capital and cash. So if that's true, and I think most people would agree that it is, that probably a revenue-based financing model is not really your most urgent need right now. It's about some type of short-term financing, which is a bit different than revenue-based financing, in my view.
Great. No, I think that's a great perspective to add there, Bob. One short question. Does anyone have anything that they want addressed? Manka, I'm going to allow you to talk. Go ahead.
Hello.
Yep, we can hear you.
Hi, Alex. Can you hear me? Great.
Yep.
Thank you. A lot of the webinars and discussions or panels that I've participated in over the past 10 days have really been focused on businesses that are providing support or researching on COVID-19 and solutions for cures and so forth. But what about businesses, like ours that have been around for a while, that are not exactly in locations that receive a lot of financing or have a large enough ecosystem? I mean, I've gone through a couple of the resources that have been mentioned here, the case resource, and from other accelerators that I've been in. It's just, it seems like the pipeline was already small, and it's even smaller. I'm wondering what the panelists would recommend in such a scenario, aside from trying to get financing from a bank when you don't have any prior investors and you're still looking for that first set of seed financiers.
Great, thanks, Manka. Panelists.
I have two suggestions, or thoughts. One is, and I'm sure you're already doing some of this. And by the way, good luck with your business. And if you're particularly challenged that way, that is a big challenge. But one is, and this is a general principle anyway, I think, is to have an internal task force with regard to how you're responding to COVID-19 and try to have some structure around that and benefit from the wisdom and insight and even the energy of your team. And I'm sure you're doing that. But this also could relate to brainstorming around this very question, which you might have already done. So that might be a gratuitous suggestion. But the other, frankly, is is working with GSBI. Alex, I think to some extent that the question is over to you guys about, and I don't know, I hate to put you on the spot, but you know all of the social entrepreneurs so well, and already have some information, right, and database on potential funders. But I would think that perhaps, and you must be doing something, but that's a place to start or address or something.
Yeah, so Bob, that's a great segue to my wrap up here. And Manka, sorry if that's not a complete answer. So Miller Center is working with several of our funding partners to help them better understand what bridge funding mechanisms are appropriate and what the need of our alumni community is. Manka, I know you've already filled out our survey, so thank you for doing that. Anyone else on the call that does have a bridge financing need, please do fill out the survey that I've been sending you, and we'll send that as follow-up as well. That's going to really help us understand where the need is and for what, and help communicate that to some of our funding partners who are interested in supporting the entrepreneurs that we're working with. And yeah, besides that, I would definitely recommend the case directory, and GSBI is trying to collate and recommend other funding opportunities as well. But yeah, we're trying to be advocates on your behalf and working with our funding partners to articulate your need and help them develop appropriate mechanisms to do that. I just want to give a quick plug for our upcoming webinars. As the panelists said, being able to pivot your business and being able to manage your cash flow is crucial for getting your funders to put in more capital. And so we'll be doing webinars on both of those topics next week. You should all have the invitations, and again, those will go out in the follow-up to this meeting. We're also putting together a 3-week mentored short course on crisis business planning, on how to adapt and pivot your business to the current climate. It's still in the works, but we anticipate to be launching that within the next 2 weeks. And so we're trying to gauge interest in a program where you would work with your mentors to adapt your business to the current COVID-19 crisis. So if you're interested, please let me know, and that will go a long ways to building that program out. So with that, I just want to say thank you so much to all the panelists who joined us today. Really great insights, and I know that these are crazy times for all of you, so we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us and to provide your insights to our entrepreneurs. So thank you so much, and thanks to all the social entrepreneurs who joined us. We know these are tough times, so stick at it, stay strong, and know that Miller Center and our community is here to support you however we can.
Yeah, and good luck.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to end the meeting now. We'll be sending out follow-up and this recording, but hope you all have a good day. Bye, everyone.